Hello and welcome to my channel. Try This is a series breaking down a certain game or playstyle of a game. Today we're going to be talking Commander and breaking down the Tyranid Swarm pre-constructed deck. The 40k decks each have 41 new cards. Between all of the new art and those cards, each deck feels very thematic and mechanically unique. I normally build my decks from the ground up, but since there are so many interesting new cards, I'm going to just be doing a more traditional review and upgrade guide. Budget is really subjective to the person, so I'm going to break up my suggestions into cards over and under $10 at the time of recording. In the description is a link to my deck list if you want to see what cards I cut and added personally, in addition to some other suggestions. My goal is to cut as few cards as possible to hold onto the identity of the Tyranid theme. The deck has a combination of go wide and go tall components. It uses counters for its go tall element, and in these colors there are a ton of support for that mechanic. There are a lot of ways you could take this deck, so if you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps other viewers discover the content I produce and is a great way to show support. With that said, let's dive in. I really like the Tyranid deck overall, but to be honest with you, I'm not really a fan of either commander for the deck. Both the Swarmlord and Magus feel a little lackluster. There were only 11 X-costing spells in the Precon to take advantage of her mana effect, which I think is really low to justify that ability. She can still be sort of a mana dork in the command zone, which is fine. Her counters on combat is nice, but it's pretty slow for just one additional power per turn. The Swarmlord has a really cool draw effect. There's a lot of +1/+1 counters in the deck between the Ravenous mechanic and some other cards in the deck. His first ability is also cool, but at 6 CMC you wouldn't really cast him a ton to really scale up those counters. I think if he was 3 or 4 CMC, that mechanic would be a lot more interesting, sort of like Toolbox. Honestly, I think Animar would be a good replacement commander for this deck. Between the 11 X costing creatures and the other large CMC creatures in this deck, his effect would be a great discount and play into the 1/1 counter theme. I decided to stick with the Swarmlord to keep with the Tyranid tribe, but I thought I'd shout Animar out. The Precon has a pretty solid mana base overall. Herald's Horn, New Horizons, and Overgrowth are some good examples. Herald's Horn is always a nice tribal card, and the cost reduction is great for the X costing and other large creatures. Cultivate, Farseek, and Harrow are other great cards included for ramp. They provide some great color fixing effects in this list, which is always nice to see in a Precon. There are some cool utility creatures in Toxicrene and Nexos. Toxicrene is a really interesting card that shuts down your opponent's utility lands. It is worth noting that it also shuts down your own. I'm adding some other cards that don't work well with this creature, but in most cases I think he'll be okay. Nexos is an amazing card for monocolored decks and is really good for any deck with a lot of basics. Hardened Scales and Death's Presence are great includes to synergize with the 1/1 counters found throughout the deck. This deck doesn't completely focus on counters out of the box, but there are still quite a few to take advantage of these cards. Cards like Turvagon and Haruspex are some good examples. The Ravenous mechanic is a cool way to incentivize dumping a bunch of mana into something. With Haruspex, we can translate its counters into mana. Your Precon has quite a few creatures with various effects like these, making it a pretty versatile deck overall. Starting off is upgrading the lands in the Precon. Upgrading your mana base can get really expensive very quickly. The Precon has some great rocks, but the lands could use some work. Wooded Foothills and Prismatic Vista are some examples of fetch lands we can use to pull things from our deck. They're generally more expensive because they get things onto the field untapped. In the case of Wooded Foothills and other fetch lands like it, we can get non-basic lands with them. Those lands are shock lands like Steam Vents, tangle lands like Cinderglade, and the new Trians like Ketria Triome. Thankfully, Wizards added Cinderglade already to the deck, which is a great card to have in your collection. The Ozolith and Vigor are two heavy hitters when it comes to +1/+1 counters. The Ozolith can recycle counters when our creatures die. Vigor is a very dangerous card in general. Our creatures are safe from damage while it's out, while also growing them to synergize with the counter theme. Guardian Project and Rhystic Study are some heavy hitters for card draw if you feel like you're missing some in this deck. I didn't have a huge issue in my test games, but it never hurts to add cards like these. Doubling Season and Branching Evolution are both ways we can double counters on our creatures. There isn't a ton of token production, but there is enough to really take advantage of Doubling Season in this deck. They both sort of win more cards for this deck, but overall they're amazing enchantments to add. The Great Henge will wrap up this portion of the suggestions. It's a catch-all card in Magic. It gains us life, gives us mana, draws us cards, and fits our counter theme. It's always a welcome card to include and should be easy to cast between the Ravenous mechanic and other large creatures. The deck could use some more interaction, so Counterflux and Counterspell are some great budget options. Counterflux is a card I think is slept on by a lot of people. It's a versatile card that I think is welcome in any blue and red deck. By default, it's a 3 CMC uncounterable counterspell, and for 4 mana we can counter all the spells on the stack we don't control. This card has saved the game for me a few times and I highly recommend it. Tempt with Discovery and Skyshroud Claim are two cards I normally run in my list with access to green. They can both fetch non-basic lands untapped, and with Tempt it's a fun card to spark conversation with your opponents. Herald of the Secret Streams and Loyal Guardian are two cards that help out the +1/+1 counter theme. The Herald makes most of our creatures unblockable, and the Guardian will ensure they're all unblockable, assuming the Herald and the Commander is out anyway. These creatures are cheap cards that upgrade the list even though they don't fit the tribe. Forgotten Ancient and Simic Ascendancy are two more cards that fit the counter theme. Simic Ascendancy is a great alternate win condition for this Precon. The Precon has a pretty solid mana base to activate its ability, and the Ravenous mechanic allows us to quickly build up the counters on this enchantment. Fractured Hardness and Hydra's Growth are two cards that quickly build counters on specific things. These cards can enable commander damage as another win condition, or synergize with the other +1/+1 counter creatures in this Precon. Primal Rage and Temur Ascendancy are two great budget cards that provide some utility. Ascendancy also gives us card draw for most of the creatures in this list. Rhythm of the Wild and Hadana's Climb both give us some more counters while also providing some great additional utility. Rhythm can make our creatures uncounterable and can give haste, while Climb enables commander damage or evasion on specific creatures. Kindred Discovery, Bident of Thassa, and Reconnaissance Mission are all great cards to provide some more card draw. These enchantments are pretty easy to cast while we build up our board. Also, there are a few evasion abilities in this deck to help ensure we get draws with Bident of Thassa and Reconnaissance Mission. I didn't cover every card in this deck or every suggestion I had for the Precon, so if you'd like to see the rest, check out the link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing to the channel. Comment below on cards you think synergize well with this commander, and if you have any suggestions for commanders to build in the future. Thank you so much for watching, good luck, and have fun.